Okay, welcome back to Teach Me to Code. This is Eric Berry. I apologize for not getting another one done last week, but I was sick. I still am sick, so if I sound a little froggy, that's probably why. Anyway, last week we left off with a simple introduction to Grails, how to get an application up and running, how to create a domain class, and we started our project called the Nerd Herd. So I'm going to pick up kind of where we left off. Got some great feedback from you guys, and I appreciate that. What I would like to do is, well, actually what I did now is I uploaded the source code for the very first one right here. So if you click on the link there, it'll go to the Nerd Herd repository, and here you can do a checkout of exactly where we left off last time. And before we use TextMate to create our application and edit it, but now we're going to switch over to use an IDE. And the best one that I've found is IntelliJ's IDEA. What is it called? It's IntelliJ IDEA, and there are two versions that you can get. The first one is the Ultimate, which does cost money, and the second one is free. However, the second one isn't very good for doing what we're doing. So I recommend you download the trial version, the 30-day trial version of the IDEA Ultimate Edition, and that's what I did. So we're gonna go ahead and use that. So let's get started here. Here I have it installed already, and so what I want to do is create a new project from a Git repository. But before I do that, I want to clone. This. So actually, I want to fork this. I apologize. So let me make sure I'm able to do that. So I come here and I click fork, and it will fork the whole project over to my my personal repository, and then I can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to copy this to clipboard right here. It grabs the URL. Let's go back to our application and do a checkout. Now, this may not work for everyone, and the reason is because let's see here. I don't have that set up. Well, I'm not actually going to worry about this right now because I don't want to set up two different codes, two different keygens for it. But if you do have your keygen set up properly, this should work. Just set up your directory and then do a clone, and it will check out. For me, I'm going to do a checkout right here. So let's do a git clone, and I'm going to log back into the original account here. So all right, we go to Nerd Herd, and same thing we did before, but let me do it here. So you test it. That should work. And then I'm going to place it into the My Stuff folder. And it says it already exists. So let's try that again. Let's place it in the My Stuff folder. Hit OK. It does a full checkout. And it asks if you want to create a project for it. Hit yes. And then we want to import a Grails application from existing source code. Fill in the name, and there's our path. And if you don't have your SDK set up already, I'll show you how to do that. What you would do is select New SDK, and then go to where you have your Grails installed, select the folder, and hit OK, and then that should do it. And it may ask you if you want to set it up as a project or global. I did global, but you can do what you want. And here we want to run create app. So this is going to actually, I don't know why we did a create app. Let me look at this here. Yep, okay, that was right. So it created the application. So now we have everything that we had before. We have our herd groovy class, and we have all of our stuff that we created before. So what I'd like to do initially is, let's go ahead and edit a configuration here under this arrow and hit the plus sign. We want to create a new Grails run. So we're going to create a thing called run. It says run app. It's under the nerd herd module, and we hit OK. Now we hit the run button here, and as you'll see, it is compiling it, and then it will run it in a browser once it's done. It'll open it up all for us. So we'll just wait for that to finish. Here we go. So we have what we had before. We have our herd controller, and as you remember, this that won't work, but you see how we have that all. So we're exactly where we were before. So we're doing good. Okay, so we'll go back to here. It does ask if you want to check stuff in. You can do what you want there. I say no because I like to manually control the content in my repositories. So, okay, so now we have the application running. The first thing you might want to do is update the preferences. And if you go to the IDEA or the IntelliJ IDEA preferences in the drop down, you'll get this. And there's a couple of things that I like to change. The first one is basically making sure that all of them use the same one. So I click that and I uncheck use a tab character. So you can set the size if you want. I leave it at 4. And then the other thing that can be a little frustrating for people coming from TextMate is allow placement of caret after end of line. So if you do allow that, it's kind of annoying. So I always uncheck that and hit OK. And there you go. So that should get you all going now. A little secret, if you ever want to format quickly, you just hit Command A. Let me get my keycaster up and running so you can see that. Let's see, Command A. It doesn't work. Okay, Command A and Command Option I. So let's say we have this way out of format. Command A, Command Option I. Now I'll do it for you. So, all right, so there we go. We have everything set up. So we're going to take it to the next step and create a user class, because for us to be able to ask questions, we don't need to be logged in. But for us to answer questions, we want to be able to be logged in to answer those questions so that we can get credit for them and eventually create more of a Stack Overflow feel throughout the application. So a shortcut to creating domain classes here is if you right-click on your project name, and then you can click New, and then create domain Grails domain class. It will create that for you. So here you just write the name of your class. So I'll call this com.berry.user, and you'll see that it creates everything. You'll see the console output right here. It does the same as if we're doing it within the console, but it does create it for you, and then it'll automatically open up that class for us. So here we go. Here's our user class. So what are some of the things we want to track? We want to be able to authenticate by email address. They need a password. Let's record their full name. Maybe a small bio about themselves if they want. And the date created field would record exactly when they're created. So as we looked before on the herd, we have our constraints. We're going to use some constraints on this as well. So first constraint, let's look at email. We don't want to allow blank. So let's set blank to false. Let's tell it that it is an email address, and let's ensure that it is unique, because we are going to be valid. This is going to be their unique identifier. For password, let's set it to blank. But actually, instead of that, let's just set size is between 6 and 8 characters. That way, it ensures that it won't be blank, and it'll also make sure that it's within a reasonable span of size. Let's make sure the name is not blank, and the bio, we don't care if that is blank or not. And notice I don't put blank is true, I put nullable is true, because the nullable allows the value to be null, whereas the blank, if we put blank true, then it only allows it to be an empty string. But we don't really care if they fill it in or not, so let's leave it as nullable as is true. And let's set our max size on this to 1000. And there we go. We have our constraints. And after that, why don't we go ahead and create an integration test so that we can test our user to make sure that everything's working properly. So to do that, actually I haven't found a shortcut in here to create an integration test. So what I'm going to do is do it in here. So to create an integration test, you do Grails space create dash integration dash test, and then the name of the class that you want to call it. So we're going to create our integration test called user integration. And if we come back to our IntelliJ, you'll notice under test, we now have our integration test right here. And everything we want to do is pretty much down below here. I'm sure there's a way to set it to where we can set up fixtures or a default variables up here. I've tried it, but it hasn't worked for me yet. So if anybody wants to chime in and help out on there, that'd be great. But for right now, I'm just going to be kind of repetitive, but what do you do? So I've got a little bit of a cheat sheet here, and I'm going to copy and paste it, and I'll walk you through it. So here we have a test called create. Why is this doing that? All right. Okay, I don't know why it's doing that, but all right. Anyway, here we have a test called create user, and at first we create the user and make sure that it does not validate. After that, we set our email address, our password, our name. We actually don't need to set bio. So we have those three things. Now we want to assert that it should be true. So here we should validate. Then after that, we want to make sure that it is able to save, and that once it saves, it does have an ID. Then after that, we check over here and say, okay, well, we find our user. We find a new user by that old ID, or the ID that we generated up here, and make sure that once we find that the user's email address does equal the same thing that we put up here, joe@blow.com. So let's create another configuration, and let's just copy this one. We're going to call it integration tests and test app dash integration. So that's all you need here. Go ahead and save, apply that, and now we can just run our integration tests. And here it is coming through. You'll see first it compiles all of our code. Then after that, it should run our integration test. And as you can see, it did pass. And if you want to, over here we have, if you don't see this, it actually shows here, show statistics. You right click on there, show statistics, and you get this little window. I find it very useful. You see we have our test right here. Double click on that and it shows each individual test that we have inside. There is something else that you can do, which I do this more, is it creates a set of HTML files that we can use. So if you go to let's see here, where is it? Let's go to our target test reports. So here it created this directory, test reports, and it's actually the HTML one that we want to go to. So let's go to our folder, test reports, hit go, and then you'll see it has index.html right here. So let me just drag this one over here so that we can have them all in the same one. And here you see that it does do a complete export or complete report of our tests, including the system outs that we have, if we do have any system outs, and any errors that might have occurred. Very useful information. So, okay, so now that we have that, we know that this is working. Let's create another test to make sure that we can that the email validator is working. And I'm going to cheat again and paste this here. You should be able to download all of this source code from GitHub. Just make sure you download tag version 2.0, because the first one that you download will be 1.0, of course. So anyway, if you want to, you'll see that. When I'm done with this, I'll tag it 2.0 and push it up. So here we go. We create a new user. I create a simple array list of bad email addresses, and then I iterate through each email address. I set the email to the user object here and attempt to validate it. Here I assert that it's going to be false, and then here I make sure that the user errors includes the email field, meaning that if there is an error after it validates, the email is part of that. So I go through all these different ones here, and then down here I set it to a proper email address. I ensure that it does validate. In fact, it should say, well, actually, it's not going to validate because we don't have the other fields in there. The reason I call this is just to make sure that it'll populate the errors for the user. And then I make sure that the errors for the email key in here is null, meaning that there is no error that has to do with email. So let's go ahead and run this again. I'm going to save that and run it. And here you go. You see we have two tests that passed. We have both of these right here. And if we go back to our HTML file, we can refresh and see that both of those tests passed. So, all right, there we go. I'm not going to create tests for every single thing. Just going to let you kind of see how that works. And so now let's go back to our application, and we want to create a new domain called nerd. And I guess kind of what I'm trying to do is a nerd herd is a herd of nerds. So a herd would be the question that they would ask, and the nerds are all the people that come in and try and answer that question. So basically, I'm trying to keep it clever here, but a nerd is nothing more than a person answering a question. And so that's where we're going with this. So right click here, create new domain class. We're going to call it com.berry or whatever you want, .nerd. And okay, and the nerd is going to have a couple of things. First thing we want to have is a herd. So you'll notice that what I'm doing here is not setting up a standard data type. It's actually setting an object as the type. And Grails is really cool when it does this, and I'll show you where we're going with this. But when you set up belongs to or has many or the relationships, it does all of that automatically for you, which is very nice. So a nerd or an answer has a herd or a question that it belongs to, and it also belongs to a user. And there's one more thing that we want, which is our answer. So we're going to add a constraint here saying that the answer cannot be blank, and the max size is going to be 1,000 characters. So there we go. Now one more thing that we want to do is we want to set the belongs to attribute here. So we type static belongs to, and then we can assign it an array, which would be herd and user. So we know that it belongs to the herd and it belongs to the user. So now we need to go to our user and herd and set those up as well. So here we have static has many, and when we have has many, you also want to specify the name that it's going to be referenced by. So we're going to call it nerds. All right, so we have that, and we're going to have that exact code in our herd as well. So here we go. We have a herd has many nerds, a user has many nerds, and a nerd belongs to both herds and users. Now, if that's not complicated enough, I'm sorry. I'm trying to make it as difficult as I can for you. So, all right. So there we go. We have that set up. Let's go ahead and do some tests to make sure all of this works. So let's create one more integration test. I have to go back here and do it. Actually, let's create two integration tests. Let's create a herd integration test and a nerd integration test. And we'll start with the herd. So, all right. There we create both of our integration tests. You'll note over here, now we have 3 integration tests that we have. I believe the reason it shows up red over here is because it is not checked in. It has to do with it not being part of the Git repository. So if you're scared about why it's red over here, I think that's why. So, all right, we'll start with the herd. And on the herd test, we want to test create herd. So let's go ahead and we'll do this one manually. So let's set herd equals new herd, and let's make sure that it does not validate right now. And what this should do is it'll say, okay, well, I have a herd that has no attributes. Will it validate? And it won't, because we have no question and no ask by email. So that right there won't validate. And I could create individual tests for each one. For this example, I'm not going to. Let's just do herd.question equals why is the sky blue, and herd.ask by email equals me@you.com or whatever. Let's make sure that the herd does validate. So herd.validate, and let's make sure that it does save. So assert not null, herd.save. So that should return something. It would return null if it doesn't save. And then assert not null, herd.id. And what we can do also is we can just say new herd ID is herd.id, and you'll see that printed out in our test. So now we have that created. Let's go ahead and do a find on it. Found herd equals herd.find by ID, and then herd.id. And then let's make sure that the question is the same. So why is the sky blue, and herd.question. Okay, so let's save and run that. And I run my integration test. And now you should see that it has a couple of them over here, a couple of different tests, but I also want to show you the output. So you see right here it has new herd ID is 1. And it looks like I have an error. So, oops, 4 here, string, why is the sky blue, why is the sky blue? No signature method for herd tests. What do we do? All right. And this is common with when you watch what I do. Cert. So there we go. We find them, we fix them. So let's run it again. This time it should pass all the way through, hopefully. We're running 3 integration tests. Here you see we do have our new herd ID, and we have all 3 integration tests here: herd, nerd, and user. You can double click on that, make sure that it passed there. But what I like to do as well is I like to check the HTML output, and you'll see that we have all of this and herd integration test. Now if you look at system out, you'll see that it did print that out. So anytime you're running tests that you want to see the output, or you do want to see the output, you can do that by print lining it out, and then it'll show up here in your HTML. Okay, we're almost done. So now that we have that working, let's test our nerd integration. So the first thing we want to do is, and I'll do this from scratch as well. Okay, so we're going to test create nerd. The first thing though that we want to do is make sure that we have a herd and user first. So let's take some code from what we had before. Let's create our user. Let's go to our user test. Here, let's create user right here. So we'll use this information. So def user equals new user, and let's set the email and the password and the name. And we got to add some commas down here. And remember, Command A to select all, and Command Option I will format it for you. And we'll do save. Okay, so there we have a user. That's a very quick way to create a user. Same thing with herd. So let's do new herd, and let's grab the attributes that we want to set in here for it. And here we'll grab those. And question, asked by, and a comma. Command A, Command Option I formats it out for us. There we go. We have our herd, and we'll save that. Okay, so now we just want to make sure that we have a herd and a user both valid and created. To do that, let's just do assert not null user.id, and same thing with the herd.id. So that if these pass already, then we know that it's working. So why don't we go ahead and give that a quick test to make sure that we are working, so that we can finish our test here. Okay, as you can see, oh, not everything passed. Email for nerd, no such property. Email for class. So let's see here. Nerd integration test, line 17. So let's go to line 17. So user, it does not like my syntax, and the reason is because my syntax is wrong. You need colons. So, all right, there we go. So now we have email. That's how you're supposed to do it. Those of you who already know Groovy and Grails pretty well are probably just screaming at the screen right now. So sorry about that. All right, let's give it a shot. This is really important to understand why creating integration tests is very important. I admit that I'm not as good as I need to be, and coming from a Rails background, that even puts more mud on my face. But as I'm learning this, I find that integration tests and testing in general is very valuable because it forces me to do it right, and it teaches me as I go. So there we go. Everything passed. We're going to go on. Okay, so now let's generate and test nerd. Okay, so let's create a new nerd, and let's make sure that it is not going to validate. So we want to make sure that because our nerd class requires an answer, it won't validate. And after that, why don't we go ahead and set up some stuff. So we're going to say nerd.herd equals herd, nerd.user equals user, and nerd.answer equals why is the sky blue? Because if it was green, you wouldn't know where to stop mowing the lawn. Extra points to anybody who knows where that came from. So, all right, let's make sure that we do validate, and let's make sure that we can save it, and let's make sure that we have a new nerd ID. Okay, and as we did before, we're going to create a new, actually, let's do one more assertion here. Let's assert that our nerd.herd is equal to our herd above, and assert that our nerd.user is equal to our user. Okay, if I save that, then let's go ahead and run this test. Okay, you see we have 4 tests passed. We're looking really good now. All right, we're almost done on what I want to show you in this screencast. The last part I want to show you is how to generate some HTML to where we can play with this through the web. So here we have our application that we had before. Let me go to our run. It's not running right now because we did this. So if I hit run, if I select run from here and hit the run button, then it should load up another. Oh, it did not work. Let's find out what's going on. Oh, it says it's already running. So if it's already running, that's odd because I don't know what is running. So, interesting. Well, that is very peculiar. Okay. It is running. Look at that. I don't know why it's running. So let me just kill this process here. Oops. And hopefully that did it. Let's give it another shot. Yeah, that did it. All right, so here we go. We're back here. We got our herd controller where we have this stuff. Let's create a couple of new controllers. And the way we want to do this, and the reason I have the framework up, is that there's a couple of other creations that I want to do. A generate all. And I believe we covered this in the last time, but maybe not. So I'm going to go ahead and generate all on the com.berry.user. And then I'm also going to do a generate all on the com.berry.nerd. Okay, so what this does is it looks at our configuration and all of our domain classes, and it sets up the controller and the controller for that. Let's see here. So if I go into my controllers, you'll see I have a nerd controller and I have a user controller. What I did on the herd controller is I used scaffold. And you can do that as well. If I wanted to, I could have just created controllers and did that. In fact, that's probably what I should have done in this, but yeah, I'm going to do that. So to go there, you right-click on that, and you can either hit F4 or jump to source here. And let's say I want to take all this out, and scaffold equals true. In fact, that's what I actually meant to do on this. So just pretend that's what I did. We'll cover the other stuff later. So anyway. Again, use the TextMate commands. Scaffold equals true. Okay, and if you're wondering about this, I'm going to clean these up before I check it in so it doesn't have all of the other stuff, all of the views in there. In fact, I'll just do that real quick. We don't need our nerd views. Let me just delete this. Okay, and we don't need our user views here. So let's delete those, and we don't need these, so let's delete these as well. Okay, so now we're back to where if we just created a regular controller. So we have our scaffold set on those. Let's save this, and we'll go back to our website here, our application, and let's hit home. Looks like it hasn't created them yet, so I'm going to go to our run and stop it and restart it. Okay, so here you see we have our herd controller as we had before, but now we have our nerd controller and user controller. So let's go to the herd controller first, and let's create a new herd. So we have here the herd has blah blah Eric at teachmetocode.com, and we'll go back to our home. Now let's go to our user controller and create a new user. Let's do cavneb@gmail.com. Password is password. Name Eric Berry, and we'll create that. And now let's go to our nerd controller and create a new nerd. And you see we have here drop down on herd and on user. And so answer is blah 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 blah. So there you go. We have our nerd list here, and if we click on that, you'll see that there's a link already to both our user and our herd. If I click on the herd, it has an association to the nerds or the answers that are assigned to it. I can also click on user, and there we go. It has all the nerds or the answers that this user has submitted. So I hope this explains a lot. I know that probably my example wording isn't the best, but by the end of it, I think it'll make sense. I'm very, very impressed with what I've learned so far on Grails. I'm extremely excited to continue working on this. Please submit any questions or any fixes to my code that you could find. I'd love to know it, and I appreciate you watching. Again, we're still looking for sponsors, but if you did watch the last one, I mentioned teachmegrails.com. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to maintain everything on teachmetocode.com. We're always looking for new sponsors on teachmetocode.com, and if you are interested, please email me at eric@teachmetocode.com. Thank you very much.
This screencast is sponsored by Jumpstart Lab. Jumpstart Lab offers private and corporate training in Ruby, Rails, and related technologies. They're experienced educators, not just good developers, and will get you going quickly. Courses can be scheduled in the U.S. or around the world, and curriculum customized to meet your needs. Learn more at jumpstartlab.com.
That was wonderful.
Bravo!
I loved that.
Oh, it was great.
Well, it was pretty good.
Well, it wasn't bad.
Well, there were parts of it that weren't very good, though.
It could have been a lot better.
I didn't really like it.
It was pretty terrible.
It was bad.
It was awful.
It was terrible.
Get him away!
Hey, boo!
Boo!